Something calls you and you get into it and you fight it and you do it. So I have to sort of ask myself, if I don't make any money at all on this, am I still okay with myself doing it? That's an amazing thing when that happens. You're reading something from 2,500 years ago or something like that, and you just feel like that flash right across the centuries. I got to say, Ryan, it's an amazing thing you've done here. You know, I got to give you
thank you.
Major props for this.
I was thinking that you basically saw all the different, because you came right after we got the building when it was totally empty.
Yeah.
And then we did one outside, I think. And then we did one walking in Austin.
Yeah.
And then we did some inside. And then now this.
Yeah.
We didn't even know this would be possible. This building would be possible when we were doing the other two. But all the buildings were built together at the same time.
Did you own this part?
We got
before?
the first two, and then this was third. This was a barber shop. And it had been a barbershop for 100 years.
Wow.
And then and
4 generations of grandfathers.
Yes. It had been a barbershop for a very long time. So then it came on. So we did this, and we haven't quite figured out what we're gonna do with it. But studio here, office space back there. But yeah, what I was telling you inside, it's sort of a thing that you don't want to think about, but it's like if you ever like open a business, if you're taking over the space from someone, by definition, you're stepping into the shoes, not in 100% of the cases, but the vast majority of cases, it didn't work for someone before you.
Yeah.
You know?
There's vibes there. There's a reason, right?
Yes.
It's foot traffic. It's something, yeah.
It's like you're marrying a freshly divorced person. And you don't want to think about why someone was like, I don't want to be with them anymore.
And yet there are so many instances where a space has failed over and over, and then suddenly it works. And, you know?
Well, and that is kind of a, like, if you think about how often it doesn't work, it's very intimidating. But then if you really start to parse why they didn't work, you know, you start to see some space in there. But then that's a truism in publishing where people will go, oh, books about X don't work.
Yeah, right.
You know, because they've had failure after failure in that space, and then you want to do it, and they're like, of course it's not going to work for you. But if you've actually taken the time to think about what is not wrong with the other ones, but why it didn't resonate, maybe you have some.
And sometimes the times come around, you know, and people are ready for whatever it is that didn't work before. When I was doing the Daily Dad, I went to my publisher with it maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was really wanted to do it, and my publisher just said, Adrian, who you know, said, parenting books don't sell. And I was like, well, first off, that's just objectively not true. Some of the best-selling books of all time are parenting books. But also, why is that? You know, to me, why is that? And then you have to really think about why that is, and then you have to address that in how you do it. Yeah. And also, I think Adrian and a lot of other people reflectively say no to shit, you know?
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, they're
I don't blame them, but they do.
Well, their job is to say no.
Yeah.
And their job is also not to say yes to anything that will get them fired.
Yeah.
All right. So it's like you think they're in the risk-taking business, but actually they're in the risk mitigation business.
Yes.
And so they don't want to say yes to anything that in retrospect makes them look dumb.
Yeah. I confess I have that same mechanism in my head, you know. When I have an idea of something, my first response is always, you know. So I'm a believer that the goddess knows and I don't, you know, and I got to follow that.
Yeah, sometimes why you are called to do a thing is really the only thing that you are called to do the thing is what matters.
Yeah.
Not and sometimes you get called to do a thing that's very commercially viable, and sometimes you're not.
Yeah. Are we on camera at the moment?
Yeah, we're going.
This is good. This is great.
We start. Also, I don't think I've ever had a book dedicated to me before.
Well, you deserve it. You're the one that gave me the idea for this book.
It was a while ago, wasn't it? I feel like this has been...
this has been sitting around because of,
the ups and downs at my little publishing company, it's been sitting around for quite a while, probably 3 years ago or something like that. I was having breakfast with Mark Manson about a week or two ago, and he said, you told him the same thing. You said, hey, you should do a book.
I did.
That's like a calendar book,
Did I?
65
I just tell everyone
you just tell everybody that.
I remember telling you, I don't remember telling him, but I remember telling you because I wanted to read it. Because I tend to reread The War of Art or Turning Pro or one of your books, when I'm about to start a project. It's just a nice sort of headspace to get into. And then, I've read them so many times. I was just it'd be cool if this was an ongoing thing.
Yeah. Every time you blog about that or you do an Instagram post about that, I get a little spike. So thank you. Yeah.
Well, so the other thing is, do you remember last time we talked, I was checking my phone all the time because I was bidding on something.
Yes, that's right. It was, what's her name's desk, right?
Yeah.
This is it?
The desk sold for $60,000.
Joan Didion's
Joan
desk.
Didion. The desk sold for $60,000, so I did not purchase the desk. But I did buy this table.
From her?
From her estate. So this table and the chairs, and then my desk chair in my office, the chair that I sit at and write in now
is hers. Wow. So do you believe Jack Carr, my friend Jack Carr, he has bought Hemingway's typewriter.
Really?
Yeah. He doesn't use it, but he has it.
Yeah.
So, do you believe that there are vibes in this table that somehow translate?
When I wrote The Daily Stoic 8 years ago, I had this crazy idea that I would just keep it going. The book was 366 meditations, but I'd write one more every single day and I'd give it away for free as an email. I thought maybe a few people would sign up. Couldn't have even comprehended a future in which 750,000 people would get this email every single day and would for almost a decade. If you want to get the email, if you want to be part of a community that is the largest group of Stoics ever assembled in human history, I'd love for you to join us. You can sign up and get the email totally for free. No spam. You can unsubscribe whenever you want at dailystoic.com/email. I think so. I was there's this comedian named Christina P. and she was like, Joan Didion menstruated in this chair. And I was like, that's not what I was thinking about when I got it. But sometimes I go back and forth. One, should I sit in the chair or not? Is it okay to use the chair as a daily chair? And I say yes. I sit every day in Joe Didion's chair and write, because I feel like, although I am putting wear and tear over what was a very expensive antique, it's actually the most, even she would probably look down on my writing, she's very fancy, but to me, it's the way to do honor to the thing. To have it as a relic is not an insult, but it's to me, sitting in it and working in it is a continuation of its purpose and of the tradition.
Someday people will be buying your chairs, right? And they'll be bidding on eBay for that.
Well, we had this chair in our house, and I was like, what? Why did we keep this? And then I realized I've written 7 books in this chair. And then I was like, should we get rid of it? And my wife was like, we should get rid of it. And I was like, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't get rid of it, which is probably an egotistical thing to think. But I do think there are vibes in it. I think there's vibes in a lot of stuff. And I have on my desk different little totems or items that mean stuff to me. Most of them are very, very old.
What's an example? What do you have?
I have a little Roman
Epictetus's handcuffs.
Well, I'll tell you the story. So I have a little Roman penknife, a knife, and sometimes I can cut open the tape of a package with a 2,000-year-old knife. So I have this little knife. I have what do I have? Oh, I have a rock. It's a stone tool. It's like a rock that a caveman chipped away and turned into a hand weapon. So it's
where did you get that? How is it authenticated?
It matters that I believed the description.
It's like when I bought a piece of the original cross when I was in Jerusalem.
Yes. There's a racket of old relics. And they found, there's like 10 different claims to the same thing because all those churches have that, this is St. Peter's finger, and it's like we added them all up. There's 22 fingers. It doesn't work. But so I have that. I have a little memo from Truman, where Truman is getting a note from his secretary. It says like, "Dear Mr. President, should I say because of too many requests, the president must decline?" And then Truman underlined that and wrote, "The proper response is underlined HST." And so it's like a little reminder to say no to things. Cool. But to think like Truman signed it.
Yeah.
And it's like a more meaning. I could just write no, but there's that. And then I have on my wall, I have the last page from the typewritten manuscript of Gates of Fire, signed by the author.
Wow, that's really valuable. Yeah, I have a bunch of those little totems too myself.
What do you have?
Yeah. Well, one, I have an acorn from Thermopylae. From not really the battlefield because there was so much sedimentation it's buried, but it's like a scrub oak hillside. So I just picked up an acorn. Actually, I have two of them, and I gave one to a dear friend of mine, Jim Gant. I don't know if he's the Special Forces major. And he has a theory, to change the subject slightly. He says, when you give a gift to somebody, it should hurt you. It should be something where you go, oh, God, I hate this part for this thing. So I gave him that because he really deserved it. But yeah, I've got a bunch of little
what else?
Things. I have a coin of Alexander the Great, which that's amazing to me that it still exists.
Yes.
And in fact, wasn't even that expensive. It was like $125, and really, So I have that. I have various. A friend of mine has sent me sand from Iwo Jima.
Wow.
And things like that.
Sure.
And he just sent me something from Bellow Wood, World War I.
Sure.
So I got a bunch of those things. And I definitely believe it's like a little shrine that I have. If you ever visit, I'll show you, But I definitely believe that it puts out some kind of vibes,
I have one that I wear when I do talks. I have a signet ring from a Roman soldier that's still wearable. Like a copper signet ring. And I just try to think about the person who wore this, 1,800 years ago, that we have the same size fingers, and that the signet ring is still a style of jewelry that people wear.
It is amazing.
I could dip it and seal something if I wanted.
Yeah. Think of what that ring went through and what it saw. If only it could talk. Yeah.
And then on my mirror in my bathroom, it's got like a little sort of thing you can set stuff on. I have a chunk of a tombstone that I bought on Etsy or something. Probably a cemetery got torn apart or a gravestone fell apart and they replaced it. And it's just a chunk of a tombstone. And the only word on it, it just says Dad.
Wow.
And it's just kind of a memento mori that I think about. I see it, a couple times a day.
Yeah. Somehow it's important for this stuff.
Yes.
I don't know. You can call it superstition, but it reinforces stuff that you want to reinforce, particularly over time. Something thousands of years old. Yeah.
Well, there's a story about Epictetus. So Epictetus has this little shrine in his house to the gods, and he has this golden or silver lamp, and he's in bed. And he hears someone rustling. Someone has broken into his house. And so, he makes his way down the hallway, and a thief has broken in and is in the process of stealing the lamp, and he sees him running away with the lamp. And Epictetus says, "I'm a fool. You can only lose what you have. Tomorrow I will go and buy an earthenware lamp." And his point was that he had this thing that he didn't want stolen because it was valuable. It was the problem was him, not the thief, right? So he buys a cheaper lamp the next day. It's kind of a Diogenes the Cynic kind of thing. Like have fewer possessions and you're less vulnerable to fortune or misfortune. And so that's Epictetus. That's his lesson. But then after he dies, an admirer of Epictetus spends thousands of dollars to buy the earthenware lamp, which is a Stoic lesson, I guess you could say, against this table and the mementos and the rings and this stuff. I think as long as you don't, to me, as long as you're not holding them up as these priceless relics that, you keep in a safe somewhere, maybe you can kind of split the difference.
Yeah, I can't think of any more relics that I have. That's it for me.
No, don't you? I think last time we talked, don't you have like a World War II bomber jacket?
I do. I don't really think of that as like a relic. I use it all the time.
Right.
I look like Joe Biden when I wear it. It's like.
But isn't it cool when you have stuff that's old, but then it still has its telos. Like it's still just what it is.
Yeah.
And it still works.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's something I think sacred in that, in almost respectful in it, in that you are putting it to the use for which it was made.
Yeah. And you have to have tremendous respect. Every time I put it on, I think, who wore this thing and whatever it was. And I saw a documentary about, I'm sure you know this, I never did, about, I guess it was the 9th Air Force, the Air Force that were flying missions over Germany. And the reason for those bomber jackets was it got to be like 10 below zero.
Yeah.
There was no insulation, air conditioning or anything like that. And they were up there for like 10 hours, 5 hours one way, 5 hours back. And it was cold.
Yeah.
So.
And does yours have a map sewn in it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Also the idea of like, let's sew in the lining a map. So if you get shot down, you know how to get back. And there was other stuff sometimes sewn in there.
Yeah, which I don't even know. There's all kinds of stuff in there. Yeah. Actually, that jacket was a friend of mine's, and I just admired it, and he took it off and just gave it to me.
The gift should hurt.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure it did. Yeah, but it sure meant a lot to me. It was great. Yeah.
And there's also, I think, some, like I have my grandfather's car. It's like a 2000 Cadillac, which has no practical value whatsoever. I've spent way too much money just to keep it operational. I almost never drive it, but it just it's like having it.
That's another thing that you can still use, right?
Yeah, sure.
It still works.
Yeah. It's not exactly practical, for having 2 young kids. But my favorite part is when you get in, it's meant for like an old man. The steering wheel raises up. It just assumes you've got like a belly, But I think just having it, there is kind of a way to like keep the tradition alive, or the embodiment of the thing going. And that's what that means to me anyway.
Yeah. There's a question I wanted to ask you. It has nothing to do with anything we're talking about. How did you originally meet Robert Greene, and how did that whole sort of mentorship thing? I know you were 19.
Yes.
Tell me that story.
So I read the 48 Laws of Power when I was in high school, and I was like, they make books like this? I think it's so amazing when you read something, and people have this, I think, with music more often than books probably, where you're like, I didn't know that was a thing, that you could do that was possible to do that. And you're like that. So I read that, and it was just it's such an amazing book because it's a synthesis of so many other books. It's kind of like a survey course of ancient history and wisdom. So I was working for this other writer, Tucker Max, who ran Robert's website at that time. He had kind of like a blog thing. And so Tucker worked for Robert, and I got to tag along to a lunch that they had, and Robert was complaining about needing a research assistant, and how
where was this now?
The alcove in Los Feliz.
And which is where Robert lives now, right?
Yes.
In Los Feliz. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was complaining about one terrible research assistant after another, and I remember when I had read the 48 Laws of Power, one of the things I went and did after I read it was I went and read all the books that were in it. Like and it was this weird exercise for me to go, he just read all these other books, and these are the things that he took out of those books. So
were you at Riverside then?
Yes. Yes.
UC
so I was
Riverside.
in college.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so, anyways, Robert was complaining about needing a research assistant, and I said, I'll do it. Like, please, basically, like, how can I do it? And so he gave me a shot, and it started like that.
And he would just give you assignments, and
he had me start. I transcribed hours and hours of interviews that he was doing. He was writing this book with 50 Cent.
And so he just started sending me files and I would transcribe them. And that was sort of the test of whether, you know, could you give this person a task? Would they come back with it in a timely way? You know, it's kind of mind-blowing how often, you know, you'll give someone a shot and you'll be like, send this to me by next Tuesday or call me on Friday. And like, they can't even do that.
Yeah, right.
Just like, hey, be here at this time and we'll talk. And so I think 90% of it was probably just, can you respond?
Yeah.
You know? And so I transcribed that stuff at first, and then it was sort of like, how do you respond to feedback, all that. And then he started giving me books that he thought there might be something in, or probably thought there wasn't anything in, but wanted to double check. So it would be like, read this and tell me if there's anything in here that I might use. And so I just sort of worked my way.
Now, were you a reader before that, or did that influence you to become the reader that you are today?
I mean, I was definitely reading a lot. Like, I loved reading and I'd fallen in love with reading, but I think that was kind of like, that was graduate school for me. You know, like, because he was having me read stuff that I would never have otherwise read, which would turn me on to stuff. Like, I had to go figure out, it's funny, I was in college when I started and ultimately left work for him, but I had never used the library at my college until he had me go, he was like, I need this. And that book wasn't in print anymore. Or, you know, like, I had to make copies. Like, I just use the resources of the library of the college that I was no longer a student at. I would use Samantha's ID card to do stuff at the library. So I had to figure out how to professionalize this.
What you were doing,
the hobby
out of
that
love.
I already had. Yeah.
Now, were there moments when Robert actually mentored you or sat down and, you know, you would ask him something and he would answer it, or did it just come sort of organically?
The way I kind of conceived of it was, I thought, you know, what would somebody pay for Robert's advice? Like, I knew he had all these sort of clients or CEO people that would, you know, give him like a monthly retainer. They'd pay him by the hour to like, hey, I have this problem. What does the guy who wrote the 48 Laws of Power think about this, right? And so the way I thought about it was, it's like I'm earning a certain amount of credits for that, right? Like, and so every time, you know, I'd have to go to his house to drop off some papers or something, I'd be like, I probably get like one, maybe two questions, you know? And I would go, hey, you know, what's a good book about this? Or I remember one time I was like, how does the index on a book work? You know, I was like, does the author, like, I just had all these practical questions about publishing, you know? Like how do you have to like keep a running tab as you're writing a book, like what you mentioned and what page it's on, you know? He's like, no, the publisher takes care of all that. He didn't tell me later, and I didn't realize till later, you know, the publisher charges you for that. But so I just asked questions, and then I was, you know, like, how do you research books? And he walked me through like his system of note cards, which I still use to this day. So I would just, you know, kind of occasionally pepper in questions, and then I would have career or work questions, and it kind of just went like that. So I do tell people, you know, like, in retrospect, he was my mentor or I was his apprentice, but that's not how it goes. You know what I mean? Like, it's not an arranged marriage. Or, you know, Benjamin Franklin, his dad sells him to like his older brother, basically. That's how apprenticeships used to go. There was like, in the way that weddings were a contract and there was a dowry and all, you know, it's a much more informal, organic process, you know, and only as the years go by is it clear what happened and why it was happening. And usually it only counts if it works out, like if you go on to do something.
Have we talked at all since I had lunch with him?
No.
Yeah, I had lunch with him. I probably was like 9 months ago or something like that. First time I've ever met him. And, you know, I have tremendous respect for him, you know. And
where'd you guys meet?
Over, not in Los Feliz, but at Beechwood, the Beechwood Cafe, Beechwood Canyon, you know where that is in LA? Yeah. And yeah, it was great. You know,
How did it go?
Nothing particularly came out of it or anything like that. But for me, it was just a pleasure just to meet him and see him in person.
Yeah. What do you like about his stuff?
First of all, what he does, it's like you too. He invented that shit completely himself. Like,
Yes.
there were no books like that ever, you know? And I also utterly relate to his backstory, which I wish I knew more of. I know he had, sort of like mine, he had like a million kind of lowball jobs all over the world in Europe, right?
Yeah.
And somehow out of that, he evolved. And I know that he tried being a screenwriter for a while. He tried being a novelist for a while. And then I guess it was somebody else gave him the idea for 48 Laws of Power, right? And
he had an idea for the 48 Laws of Power, and that guy fronted him. Joost Elfers, who's
that's right,
packager on the first three books. Basically was like
Joost, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Basically was like, I'll stake you for a year.
Yeah.
It was an expensive bargain, but
yeah. But God bless him.
It's like a VC or something.
But that's why I admire him. His odyssey, his internal odyssey, is so interesting.
Yes.
And that how all of a sudden, from like being nowhere, comes this great thing, right?
Yes.
And now he's on the road, and it's like nothing can stop him.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The 48 Laws of Power was a book long underground.
Yeah.
And
the one thing I wish he would do is write, like I just wrote a memoir, as you know, Government Cheese, right? Mm-hmm. Where I sort of went back and told my stories, right? I would love to hear his stories.
You should do that.
When is he in Europe? How did he meet? Who did he meet? What happened? It would be fascinating. I think even just as an artifact for the future. How does a guy get to wherever he's got to?
Yeah, or someone should just interview him and just get. If he doesn't want to write it, if he doesn't want to write it, somebody needs to get it all on audio or something, so it's there.
Yeah.
Well, I selfishly had him do a daily book also, and he talks a little bit about it in the different parts. But I think what's also so amazing about Robert is like the 48 Laws of Power Robert should be a tenured professor at the Yale School of whatever,
Absolutely.
Right? And
I don't know why he isn't.
Yeah, for him to do it outside the system, there are not many independent scholars.
No, there used to be, but
of his kind of weight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know what Robert's like? Robert's like the American equivalent of like, you read these books and it's like some British lord right, who's just brilliant, but
Faraday or somebody
just writes this incredible work writes this incredible work of history, this multi-volume series on some obscure thing that shouldn't be commercially viable, but they're so smart and have independent means so they can do it. Robert is like the middle class American version of that story where without any sort of university behind him or major publisher behind him, he just produces this work of both scholarship and history that is going to stand for a generation. And
or a lot longer.
What I also admire about Robert, it's different for me, but like that's all Robert does. Like he's kind of the last of, I mean, even for you, like you do videos and he does some of it now, but like you've been blogging for, 10 plus years. Basically, Robert is, there's Robert Caro and a handful of other authors from the old generation that just write books. And they disappear for 5 years as they work on this masterpiece. And it comes out and everyone's like, what is this? Almost nobody gets to do that anymore.
The other thing I admire him for is the self-doubt that he must have dealt with all along because of what he's setting off on these voyages into terra incognita, right?
Yes.
Where if you asked any commercial editor or publisher, they go, this is going nowhere, you know? And yet he, perseveres and does it, And that's a thing that they don't teach you in
well, he's like
school.
I think he's 5 years into a project he thinks is going to take 7 years. And so, I mean, that's almost literally an odyssey, but it's this book on the sublime, which
should not be commercially viable, just as the laws of human nature should not be. The laws of human nature is a 600-page book about, everything that makes humans both rational and irrational.
Yeah.
That should not be a commercially viable book,
Yeah.
Especially for someone who, again, it's not like he's
Adrian would turn it down. Yeah.
He's not a New York Times columnist. He doesn't have a TV show.
Yeah.
So he just sort of bets on himself and these ideas that he finds that he feels called to do.
Yeah.
And obviously he has this enormous fan base that goes from book to book, but which is independently his. But you talk about going off in the wilderness. Each one of those books is this kind of self-imposed exile into the wilderness that he doesn't know if he's going to come back from. Yeah. And he doesn't know if he's going to be greeted with open arms when he returns. Yeah. And the laws of human nature literally almost killed him. 2 months before it came out, he had a near fatal stroke driving in his car in Los Angeles and was resuscitated by the paramedics and, very easily could not have regained function of his limbs, let alone his mind. Yeah. I make up that was the culmination of, years and years of stress of that enormous stress and strain of that enormous and, ambitious project.
That's another thing. I would love to ask him, what sustains you through that, Yeah. I have my own answers for that, but I'd really love to hear his answers.
Well, knowing both of you, I think your answers are very similar because we just did this event. We did a talk in Seattle and a talk in Los Angeles. And he was saying that...
Which I missed. I couldn't afford it.
You didn't tell me you wanted to come.
$81, I think it was.
You should have come.
No, actually, I was out of town.
Okay, good. All right, I'll accept that excuse.
Come.
Yeah. He was talking, I think one of the nights, I forget which one, but he was saying, those days where he gets to live with those characters or in that era of history, it's the most wonderful, exciting, rewarding thing in the world.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I was just, I made a new friend recently, a guy named James Bashara. I don't know if you know him, but he's a big student of Vedanta, which I had never really.
I don't know what that is.
It's like the Upanishads. It's sort of, adjacent to Hinduism. Okay. It's out of India, ancient wisdom. And one of the principles of it, see if I can get this right, is work without attachment is worship. Without attachment to the outcome.
Sure.
Meaning. So that I think in some way Robert is doing that. There's another principle like that says intense work, meaning for the higher level, not just digging a ditch, is rest. And that's fascinating too.
Yeah.
Because I think what it's really about is when you're doing that work without attachment or intense work, you're on the soul level instead of the ego level.
Yeah.
And that feeds the soul. And so I would be curious to hear if that rings a bell with him at all, in terms of finding the energy to keep going. It sounds like what you just said sounds exactly like that to me.
Well, I think I have found that starting a book or starting a project is scary and intimidating. Finishing or being finished with a project is a bit bittersweet or empty or even disorienting. Being in the depths of the project, where you're not sure it's coming together, that's hard. But there is this middle period where you're well past having started, you have no idea when you're going to finish, but you're just lost in the day-to-dayness of it. And you're operating under the momentum of every day stacking on top of itself. That's the most wonderful feeling in the whole world. Being in the middle of a book or in the middle of doing something exciting. When Google thinks, the people who start Google think of the early days, it's probably not literally the first day and it's not a year ago. It's a couple years in where you're starting to sense that this could be something and you're just lost in it. And the success hasn't come yet. The problems that come with success you haven't even gotten any outside, feedback at all. You're just that's the most wonderful feeling in the world. And it's very fleeting, but that I think that's what sustains you. And there is something maybe holy about it.
I definitely think there is. It's also very scary, for me.
Really?
One day to the next, I really feel like I've got something going, maybe when I've hit that point. And each day, we'll talk about resistance. Each day is like, well, maybe I should take off today because we've got, and then having to force yourself to get over that hump and then doing it, and having that momentum. You're right. And the great part about that is that nobody knows about it but you, right?
Yes.
It's like you're in space. You're in a capsule all by yourself, and you're just thinking, is this as good as I hope it's going to be? And, that is a great feeling.
Or you're not even thinking about what anyone else would think at all. That the ideal state is it's really lighting you up. You're really excited to get this thing down, to express this, to make this happen. And you're not close enough to the end to be going,
right.
Are people going to like it? How's it going to do? How many copies is it going to sell?
Yeah.
And that's the work without attachment phase. And that's probably the purest expression of any of it. And the longer you can be in that, the better. And you should protect it and appreciate it while you're in it.
Yeah. That's where I think Robert is, when he's working on something,
Sure.
I'm sure you and I are in that place too, That's,
but my books are shorter, so there's
really curious to hear
for me, that's a process measured by days or weeks, right? And for him,
years,
for him, I think he gets, it's a big chunk of time, which is probably both scary and all of it's exaggerated, right? The starting phase might be a year for him, so that could be a really uncomfortable, disorienting phase too.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is it in the Gita? It's like you're entitled to the work, but not the fruits of the work.
Yeah, exactly. Which is the same thing as what we were just talking about. Yeah.
So the longer you can stay with that idea that like, no, getting to do this is the reward.
Yeah.
That's what I'm excited about. That's where I'm putting myself. Eventually, you do have to think about how it's going to do and who's going to like it, because it's a commercial world and you're making it for an audience. But there is. The longer you can stay in that sort of suspended state
I'm thinking, look at this studio that we're in now. This is your little spaceship, that you've put together here. It's like an 11-year-old boy's fantasy of what, something might, but that's, this is it. This is the spaceship,
Yeah. Well, I sometimes feel that too, because like there's no windows in here. And, there's no phones. And so you talk for an hour or two, you come out. It's like, when you go to the movies, you get to a movie at like 4 and it's light out. Then you leave the movie and it's dark and you're just like, what happened? But that, because you just got totally lost in a world. You were immersed in a thing. You were totally present, or you cut out the vast majority of external distractions. Anytime you can get that in some sort of productive or creative work environment, that's where the magic happens.
That's again the sort of the thing of intense work equals rest, right?
Yes.
And another thing I really admire about Robert Greene, because I agree with this completely, is there are a lot of people on Instagram and they're putting out cold plunge and all of that sort of stuff is but Robert's thing is work. Robert's thing is, it isn't just you breathe and you walk on the grass and that sort of thing. It's you have something calls you and you get into it and you fight it and you do it. You know, and that's the way you find some kind of traction or some sort of soul rest or worship or whatever you want to call it. So I really admire him for that too, because nobody sells you that. Nobody teaches you that. It's not like anybody gave him a check or anything like that. He just did it, and God bless him,
Yeah, well, I think seeing it as a battle, which you both share that idea. And
as
then
do you.
I also I always saw Robert as being very monk-like. He's sort of very like as I was saying, like this is all that he does. He's not jetting off to this place or this place. He doesn't live in some big mansion. It's like it's a very workmanlike, solitary is not the right word, but it's workmanlike, and it's somewhat removed, and yeah, he's just doing it.
Yeah.
And what comes out is spectacular, but it's, it's not all in pursuit of some like corporate consultancy or
it's the opposite of that.
It's really like,
Yeah.
And I his books are also like works of art. Like they're beautiful. Like not only did he invent this sort of writing style, but then, you open the 40 Laws of Power and there's different colors and the text is arranged in this weird way. And then it worked at a level and for a group of people that not only should it not work for, like these ancient Chinese philosophies mixed with Machiavelli, mixed with these, Middle Eastern or Middle Ages figures, all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, not only should that not be commercially viable at all, like Robert's books are some of the most shoplifted books in publishing, and they are some of the most requested and the most banned books in prisons.
Really? Wow,
And so
I did not know that.
You go, how do you just write something that's relevant to people experiencing that for whatever reason, but two, that is applicable and usable and desire, like he has taken something again that should be academic and elite, and he's not only made it popular, but he's made it accessible to both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah. It is actually encouraging to me that those books have found a market. That there are people that do want to read it. It isn't like he's in a vacuum.
Yes.
And they're not easy to read. It's some of those stories you got to read through them.
But it's not like he's it's not like, oh, he's kind of got this like small following. Like Robert has sold probably between 10 and 20 million books. Not like amazing. A couple, like one of the best-selling nonfiction authors alive.
Yeah.
And that's incredible. And then to again, for that to be so spread out demographically, I think is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's the best.
So
and
he's one of a kind. There's nobody like him.
It's a reminder also, though, that the audience is smarter than people in publishing want to tell themselves it is.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing about him is like the way he has lived his life.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it from the outside, you would really have to admire it. And yet nobody does it. It's sort of like in the ancient world, people would say, the Spartan way, that's the way to live.
Yes.
And yet no other city, in the whole world ever copied it, because it's too hard.
Yes, that's true. It's no, he's the best. But I mean, same with you too. I mean, when you wrote these books, that I can't imagine most people in publishing were really excited for historical military fiction. Not in the mid 90s, early 2000s.
Actually, they were at the start. I mean, at least once the book came out.
Yes.
But before it came out, no.
But I mean, even now, it's not trendy.
Yeah, true. It's very niche-y. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's not what a 36-year-old woman who went to an East Coast liberal arts college and lives in Manhattan enters publishing to be able to champion. Like you're not their dream author.
That's for sure.
Neither am I.
Yeah.
This isn't what they would like to be publishing. So there's always this part of the market that is underutilized because they're not, or not under spoken to because they're not representative of the people who sit at the gates of whatever the industry is.
Yeah.
I was thinking about your books. Like, they've had this weird life too, where you've got generals reading them, and then you've got new recruits reading them, and then you've got regular people. Like, also something that manages to work on multiple levels, which Roberts does, is the sign, I think, of something that has some kind of deeper truth to it.
I hope that's true.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, do you ever think about sort of the spectrum of people who are able to enjoy Gates of Fire or the War of Art? Like, you have people who have sold hundreds of millions of records that are a fan of the War of Art, and then you have someone who's literally never produced anything and is just thinking about starting that, and they can both come to the War of Art and take something from it.
Yeah, I don't think about that too much, you know.
Really?
I'm just sort of doing it for myself in a way. I don't know. Do you write things that way? I'm certainly not. I don't have like an avatar in mind at all, because it always surprises me. The people that read my books are always different than who I thought they would be.
No, I'm also surprised. But I've found, the more I've thought about Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, the more I am in awe of it, right? Because in one sense, the book should be inaccessible and incomprehensible to us. Like, you have the most powerful man in the world in an empire 2,000 years ago, who believed preposterous things about where the universe came from and what even their sense of right and wrong. And, you know, like the Romans were like us and then were utterly not like us, right? And so, and no one was more removed from normal modern life than the emperor of of Rome. And so you have this man writing to himself in his palace, or, you know, on the front lines in this tent at night, and he's writing in Greek to himself. Like, he's not attempting to publish anything. That's the remarkable thing about what Meditations is.
Talk about not having any attachment to the outcome. Yeah.
But because he has no attachment to the outcome, he's not thinking whether it could be consumed in any way. So he's writing in shorthand, and he's referencing, you know, he goes, you know, like that time with the customs operator in insert distant province, or, you know, he's like that story about Socrates and the coat, you know, and we don't know what he's talking about. He references plays and literature that is lost. It's the only instance of that line from Euripides or whomever. So he's writing in a foreign language to himself 2,000 years ago from his incredibly isolated, elevated perch on the top of Roman life. And yet you crack open this book, Meditations, to himself, and it's not just, oh, I get a sense of what he's talking about, but it sounds like he's speaking to you with what you are dealing with right now. In a world where you have an iPhone and you're driving a car and there's nuclear weapons and you can travel at supersonic speed. How does this make sense? Yet what it is ultimately is the specificity, the total insularness of it makes it utterly generalizable and relatable. He was authentically being himself, and in that way manages to speak to millions for all time. And then you have Cicero, who's the great speaker of that time, trying to create these works for posterity that basically nobody but the scholars reads or gets anything out of anymore.
How did you originally come upon the Meditations?
I was at a conference in college. I was writing for my college newspaper, and I went up to the guy afterwards and I said, "You seem smart. You know, what books do you recommend?"
I read?
Yeah. And he said, "You know, I'm reading this guy Epictetus. Maybe you would like Epictetus." And so I went to Amazon and I typed in, you know, Epictetus, and it came up. But then also Marcus Aurelius came up. And I'd seen Gladiator, so I was like, maybe I'll start with that. So I got Meditations. Amazon Prime didn't exist, so like I had to buy some other books, and they all came. I would have read Gates of Fire right around this time also, because I remember buying that on Amazon, and then it got lost, and I had to buy it. I remember writing to Amazon customer service to get another copy, and so which is still the one that I have upstairs in my office. But you know, it just came, and I open this book and it's not ancient philosophy at all. You know, the first passage in Meditations, Marcus, is, you know, when you wake up this morning, you're going to meet people who are annoying and obnoxious and frustrating and weird. And he just lists, you know, the sort of perennial, you know, types of human beings. And you go, wow, like suddenly all the distance and all the centuries disappear, and it's two humans talking to each other.
Yeah. That's an amazing thing when that happens, you know?
Yeah.
When you're reading something from 2,500 years ago or something like that, and you just feel like that flash, right?
Yes.
Right across the centuries. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also something special in Meditations in the sense that because he was writing to himself, he says you. He says you, you know, could die at any moment. He's like, when you have trouble waking up in the morning, say to yourself, you know, I was put here to get up and do things, not to huddle under the covers and stay warm. Since he's having a conversation with himself, the fact that somehow, and we don't know who preserved it and why, the fact that it was preserved and published, it now gives the effect of he's talking to you. He's talking to himself. He's talking to both of us, but it's different than your typical book, which is addressed to everybody and thus nobody. It's you. And you do that in your books, you know.
I mean, I first heard of it through Jim Mattis.
Really?
When I asked him, you know, what book, like you, he said, what book, you know? Marcus Aurelius. So now I had to read it because he's got rooms like this. You know him. He's a friend of yours. He's like a great reader, and he's read, you know, and for that to be like his book, his number one book, but for what he was doing, obviously at the level he was at, you know, 4-star Marine general going up to Baghdad, being Trump's, you know, living in that world, being Secretary of Defense with that sort of horror that was going on. I can absolutely see why, you know, Meditations is something that he would just imbibe, you know, straight, you know, into the bloodstream.
Have you read Thomas Ricks? You know his stuff?
I have, but I just remember the name. Remind me.
He wrote First Principles, which is about the beliefs of the founding fathers. He wrote, I think, Fiasco about the war in Iraq. Anyways, he wrote in one of his books, he was talking about, he's like, you can imagine Mattis stressed out, life or death, all this stuff's happening. He's dusty and dirty. He's thousands of miles from home, and he goes into his bag or his tent or reaches into the car, and he picks up this book, this 2,000-year-old book written by a guy also on campaign,
same thing he was
thousands from home, trying to center himself, calm himself down, remind himself of his values. And so that is kind of the warrior philosopher tradition. And, you know, so if you're a warrior, you relate to that part of Marcus maybe a little more. If you're an intellectual type, you can imagine him, you know, falling in love with book. Marcus would write and read at the Coliseum. Like he had to go watch the games as part of his job
today.
But he would read there. And so
instead of watching the gladiators.
So you can just imagine, you know, and then as you imagine thousands of years since, people turning to that same book, there's kind of this tradition of getting out of the moment you're in by the pages of a book. So then you can go back to that moment a little wiser and calmer. I don't think you mind me sharing this. So I want to give it to you in the bookstore, but have you read Anne Rose's book on Pontius Pilate?
No, you've never even heard of it.
It's absolutely incredible. You would not think that would be a figure that would be interesting.
Are they making a movie out of this?
Maybe.
What did I read that like Brad Pitt was playing Pontius Pilate or something like that?
Well, it's an amazing book, and so I sent him this paragraph that I wrote down from that book because she spends a lot of time thinking about Pilate and the fact that he's basically a guy with an undesirable job with a shitty boss, right? He's the boss of one of the most capricious, evil Roman emperors. And so this is this paragraph. He says, "It's not hard to imagine dinner parties in Caesarea in which Pilate's guests visiting from Rome would regale him with blood-soaked stories and sexual details that would make the women cover their ears, while Pilate would listen in the awful sinking knowledge that this was the man to whom he owed his career, from whom he drew his authority, and whose safety he prayed for. Doubtless, in some sense, he could disconnect from the man from the office, as people under any regime can close their eyes to the personal sins of their rulers. But there may have been times when he could not, when amidst the genteel litter of wine beakers, chicken bones, roses, and clowns, the prefect of Judea would find himself suddenly sickened by the obscenity of his protector." So obviously this is a modern, the book's maybe 30 years old, but she's painting this scene, this figure that in this predicament that is uniquely ancient, but then utterly modern. And I sent it to him and I said, I wonder if you could relate to this paragraph, which she of course could. And you just think about kind of the timelessness of the dilemmas and the predicaments that we get ourselves into.
Think of Jesus coming suddenly before this guy who's got to make some decisions.
Well, I think about the fact that, he's basically a proconsul in the Roman Empire. That's his job. Well, Seneca writes his letters to his friend Lucilius. That's Lucilius's job in just a different, they're just, we think of these historical moments and figures as being utterly unique, as opposed to multiple people were doing the same thing at the same time. And then it's just happening over and over again. And we're history is kind of that. History is the same thing over and over. Like there were multiple stands at Thermopylae.
Yes.
There was one in World War II.
Even in the modern world. Yeah, exactly. And there will be again.
There's nothing new under the sun.
It's interesting that I hope people will be interested in this conversation that we're having. This is sort of like a Robert Greene book as well. We're really getting out there into, areas that people would say, oh, does anybody really give a shit about this? But I hope they do.
Do you know Tyler Cowen's work? He does Marginal Revolution. He's an economist. No. He's a really interesting guy. But at the start of his podcast, with a lot of them he does live, he says to the audience, just so you know, this is the conversation I want to have, not the conversation that you want to have. And I think about the podcast that way. And obviously you have to care about the audience a little bit, but I also find the less you care about the audience and the more you are just interested in where it goes and what gets you excited, that tends to be a good proxy for what people find interesting. So I'm interested. Do you have any idea how much time has elapsed?
No, do you?
I do, because I can look right there. But it's more time than I would have guessed, which is also a good sign. I tell people, if you don't lose track of time while you're working, you're probably not doing what you're meant to do.
I think it's absolutely true. It's a great test.
During the pandemic, obviously, there was this surreal experience where you'd be like, what day is it again? But I think
I'm still having that experience.
But as a writer, that's not a totally new experience. No. You should lose. The
only reason I know is what I'm doing at the gym that day.
Okay.
Because I know it's a different thing each day.
Well, it's good to have something that roots you so you don't totally spin off the planet as a creative person. But I'm all the time, more so on my earlier books, but I'd finish my writing and then I'd go to lunch somewhere or whatever, and it'd be like, it's closed on Mondays. It's Monday, I wouldn't, of course I knew it's closed on Mondays, but I just, Monday, Sunday, Thursday, Friday. What's the difference to me?
How scheduled are your days, Ryan? Like today, what will you do after we finish up here? Do you know already?
I'm basically, I wouldn't say I'm done, but I have already won. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
But you don't have something scheduled from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3.
Not really. I have the kids have soccer and there's some activity, there's that stuff. But this morning, I got up early, I went for a run, made the kids lunches, I took them to school, I wrote for 2 hours. I ate lunch, and now I'm here. So like, I have other responsibilities. I have other things. I have on my to-do list. There's, I have to call the accountant, and I have to check in on something, and I have to make a payment for. I have like some little piddly things like that, but I don't have anything that I can't push till tomorrow because I succeeded for the day because I weight the hard/important stuff up front.
I know that's one of your theories. Yeah.
And then it's all kind of gravy from there. That's how I think about it.
Yeah. I've sort of in recent years, I've kind of flipped it around. Like I always used to do the really hard stuff first, but now I find like that I'm so tired when I'm done with my real work, writing, that I don't have the strength to pay checks and pay my taxes. So I do that first, and then then I can clear the decks.
But does that impact the state of mind that you bring to the work?
Not really. I don't know why, but it seems to work okay.
I find like life wears me down, right? So, or I get frustrated or distracted. It uses a certain amount of willpower to, call Amex on the phone and then be on hold and then be like, I already gave you this paperwork, or what do you mean? Like now you have to cancel the card and then I gotta change the thing on every recurring payment. Like that. If I use up my energy on, I would rather be tired when I do that than tired when I sit down to write the Daily Stoic email for the day.
Somehow, I mean, it used to be that way for me, but somehow it flipped around. I'm not sure how or why.
Well, you've been at this 50 years.
Yeah.
Which one of the things I love about writing is it's one of the only elite professions that, compared to sports or being a model or something,
you can get better at it. Yeah.
That you can get better at it, but that also there's not a cliff that you fall off of where they go, you can't do it anymore. Like a musician can play their whole life, but the chances of you being culturally relevant, at 52 is less.
Yeah.
Whereas a writer theoretically can be doing it always and can be doing their best work later. Right?
Yes.
How has it changed for you? You're one of the people who's been lucky enough to do it a long time.
I also started late.
Yeah.
I was 52 or 53 when my first book was published. So, so in a way, I'm kind of young from that point of view. But even
so, that's 30 plus years. That's 30. You've been a successful working writer for 30 years.
Yeah, maybe not quite that long, but yeah. But
it's measured in decades, not years.
Well, I'm a believer in higher dimensions of reality, and that we serve those higher dimensions. So as long as they're giving us stuff, we should be able to, keep doing it. When I see musicians and stuff like that who sort of burn out at a certain point, or they were great for a certain time and then they haven't done anything for years, I just say to myself, I pray that's not me, but I'm also not trying as hard to be relevant as I might have, but I never really was, because I was always picking such odd subjects that if they succeeded at all, it was amazing to me.
But you watch a young quarterback versus a veteran quarterback, right? A young quarterback scrambles, maybe throws long passes, can take hits. An older quarterback gets rid of the ball quickly, throws a lot of slant routes. You never saw Tom Brady run with the ball ever, but definitely not, his last seasons. He adjusted, right? How is the difference between a 50-year-old writer and a writer today? How is that different for you?
It isn't very different.
Really?
Because I always start something with tremendous self-doubt. I always think, first of all, I think I'm not good enough to do this, or I'm the wrong person to do this, or then I think this is an idea that's never going to fly.
Yeah.
It's like the 48 laws of power, who's going to be interested in this? So I'm sort of always dealing with that. But it's always, I feel more confident. Like I can do 4 hours of work now in 2 hours. You know, I definitely feel that.
You're more efficient.
I'm more efficient. I think that I can handle the self-doubt more than I used to. It wouldn't drive me completely crazy. But I'm still just a believer in sort of being led by something, you know, and trying to be a servant of that, whatever it is, and keep the faith, you know. It gets more mystical over time, I think, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I'm any better. I don't feel like I'm any better as a writer. I mean, when I go over a page that I've written a third draft or something, I look at it, I go, what the fuck is, you know, how could, you know, I still feel like I'm a guy with very minimal amount of talent that's making it work like Steve Kerr calls himself an overachiever in basketball. You know,
Yeah.
He didn't have the ability, but he just worked so hard so that's still the way I feel. And as long as I have the energy to keep doing that, then I'm okay. And I do think it energizes you. That thing I said about rest before, it does. I've been just here in Austin now for 2 days, away from work, and I'm getting a little drained by it, you know?
Yeah.
I want to get back and get
Can
into
you
it
work
again.
on the road or no?
I can't, you know, I just can't. You know, it's like I lose fitness on the road too, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe it's my own resistance. I don't know, but I can't on the road.
I think like the last page in the Daily Pressfield is about that Spartan king who was still fighting in the Spartan ranks at 82.
Which is hard to believe, but true. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people have a remarkable staying power, but maybe that's the idea. It keeps them young. Like
I
the
hope
Rolling
so.
Stones are still doing it because they're still doing it. And if they stopped, is that where it...
I wonder how much I'd really be curious to know how much are they still doing it? Do they still, I know they have a new album.
Yeah.
But do they still get together in the studio? Are they still producing new material, or do they live their separate lives?
But even just playing, I mean, music, the cool thing about music, unlike what we do, is music is something you can make new music of, but also performing the old music is still the art,
which we can't
right?
do, yeah.
Yeah, and so the ability to, they have been playing music in front of people for 60 years? How long? I don't even know.
Long time. Yeah,
and they're still.
They started when they were like 16 or something.
Yeah,
like
and they're still doing. I mean, Paul McCartney is still performing.
Yeah,
and so is perhaps the idea that because they're still doing it, it keeps them young in some way.
I mean, I feel that way, you know, about my own work, you know.
Yes.
And if I were to stop, I think I would go off a cliff, you know, psychologically or emotionally, spiritually, you know.
Yeah. Well, you don't seem, you're 80, right?
Yeah, I just turned 80.
You don't seem 80.
Well, like I say, I started so late, you know, maybe I don't know what it is, but I'm hoping this is sort of my challenge at the moment. I'll put this out to you for whatever this is worth.
Yeah.
You know, the floating in the air is a concept of what you should be at 70, 60, 80, whatever it is, right? And it ain't a good concept as you get up higher and higher, right?
Sure.
It's like now
the expectations
start
get lower,
falling, right? You know, so I'm having to sort of every day reprogram or counter-program that, you know, and say that's not me. I refuse to do that. You know, and you know, so far I'm knocking on Joe Didion's desk. So far, so good. But I certainly believe that work, for me, is the answer. You know, that's what keeps me energized, what keeps me sort of connected to the source of power.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to keep doing that as long as I can.
Well, what's remarkable about Joan Didion, right, is she's this great, young, successful writer. She's the hottest new journalist on the planet. Yeah. And she is for many, many decades. And then in the early 2000s, you know, she's could have deservedly retired, you know, is you know, people think the best work is behind her. And then she gets knocked by two horrendous tragedies. Yeah. Her husband may have even been sitting at this table, you know, and drops dead. Yeah. And then within 18 months, her adopted daughter also dies. And
it's not like a good thing that it happened, but perhaps her two greatest, certainly her most moving books, come out of that terrible tragedy.
Yeah.
She writes A Year of Magical Thinking, and then she writes Blue Nights, which are Joan Didion marshaling all of her talents and experience to explain and communicate the worst and hardest thing that she's ever gone through. And these are the books that people now give to people when they lose someone, when they're struggling, when they're facing their own mortality. And she took this experience and turned it into something. It's not an experience. I think as I've come to understand the idea of the obstacle is the way, now 10 years post writing that book, it's not, it's great that this happened because it's that this happened. And from that, what I was able to do is this, right? It's, you didn't choose the obstacle, and the obstacle was terrible and painful and awful. But you made something come out. You were the best version of you inside that. And because of that, you did something good largely for other people. And that's what those two works are. But I think there's kind of this, like the historian's argument would be that everything she went through and did up until that point was leading her to be able to respond to that moment with the height of her artistic powers.
Yeah. I mean, that would be true to some extent. To me, what I would just say about that is that that's art.
Yes.
That's what art is, I think.
Meaning
Taking
from
pain and producing, and like, a lion can't do that. AI can't do that.
Yes.
And producing this gift, I mean, talk about the soul level.
Yes.
This gift that, like you say, you could hand that book to somebody in pain, and this is going to actually mean something and help them somehow. So God bless her for being able to do that at that, under those circumstances. But that was what everything in her life led to up to that point.
Well, one of the things Robert Greene told me, it's one of the best pieces of advice I ever got from him. He said, it's all material. The best thing.
That's what Nora Ephron said too,
The best thing about this job is that you take all the shit that life throws at you, all the heartbreak and the pain and the problems and the mistakes, and you find a way to get something out of, to turn it into something. That you have this superpower in that you can take the worst moment of your life and make something of it. Whereas as an ordinary civilian, you might be somewhat at a loss. You're not, because actually everyone can learn and grow and change by what happens. But as an artist, your path is so much clearer. How do you speak about this? How do you make something from this? This is also true as a parent, as a leader, as a sister or brother. Like, it's also true for regular, it's just less clear. As an artist, it's so obvious. Go make art from this.
And yet, the interesting thing, at least for me, in my experience, is it's not like you take it directly. It's not like X thing, I mean, Joan Didion did this, but X thing happened to you, and then you write about that. For me, it's like X things happened, and then you write something over here that seemingly has nothing to do with that whatsoever, but in some crazy way is informed by that. And I don't know how. It's a mysterious thing.
I'm reading about Hemingway right now, and I guess early in his career, he was in one country, his wife was coming from it. His wife is traveling to meet him, and she has all of his manuscripts in a satchel, and she leaves it in a train station where it's stolen. And he loses everything. And there's this letter, he's talking to one of his editors, and he says, like, don't tell me this is good. I'm not there yet. But with time, he does come to understand that it was good in the sense that he had to start fresh. He had to, it's Cortez burning the boats. It's wiping the slate clean.
What book are you reading?
Everyone Behaves Badly. It's a book about,
I just read that a little while ago. It's a great book, really, by a young gal that, pulled it out of nowhere. Have you read That Summer in Paris? I think it's called by, I'll send you that thing. It's, what was it about? I forgot the guy was kind of a minor writer who happened to know Hemingway, and he and his wife went to Paris and sort of hung out with all of those people. And this is his version of what it was really like. And he's boxing with Hemingway and that kind of thing. I'll send it to you because I can't remember the guy's name now. I blanked it out. That Summer in Paris, it's called.
But I really like that idea of I'm not there yet. Because eventually you do get there, right?
Yeah.
Enough time passes and you see how
I don't know if I'd get there.
That thing shapes you, or it informed you, or it forced you to go in a different direction. Like in retrospect, we look at most of the things that have happened to us and we go, that was making me who I am. In that moment, though, we wanted nothing more than for the opposite.
So the moral is save everything to the cloud.
Yes. Yes. I try to do that, actually. I try to have multiple places that I save.
Me too.
But, I have lost stuff. And what does it do? It forces you to go back and redo it. Yeah. And in some ways, it's like a forest fire. It clears it all out, and you only the essence remains.
I find I can never get to the level that I was the first time.
Do you think so, or is it actually
it's never
better?
The same. I don't know. It's never been better for me. It's like always a disaster.
I'm enjoying the book. Hemingway has always come off as a complete dick to me, though. I like Hemingway's writing, and I like Hemingway as a person less.
Yeah, I sort of feel the same way,
Yeah.
But his writing is so great. When it's great, it's so great. It's so much better than anybody else was doing at the time, or even now.
Yes. Well, she's talking about in the book, speaking of like the obstacles of the way, he discovers his writing style almost accidentally in that he would have to send these international cables. Like they'd send him to cover a war in Greece, and Hemingway would go, and he'd obviously consume all this information, and he'd have to cable back, like troops routed, thousands dead, or whatever, right? And then they would translate that into several paragraphs of he would have to figure out how to, in as few words as possible, because they're charging him a fortune a word, express the essence of the event. And he's talking to another writer. He's showing him the cables. And the guy's like, yeah, isn't that cool how like they go from the cable to all this paragraph? And he goes, no, read the cables. Aren't the cables great? And so it's the constraint of having to wire information across the Atlantic and not being able to say everything that he wants that makes Hemingway a great writer. And so, the obstacle is the way isn't just you lost everything and now you have to start over. It's just the guardrails that you resent at first. The publisher tells you got to cut 10,000 words out of the book or it's going to be too expensive. And you think, how dare you? But it actually forces you to go back and solve all these problems that were caused by the fact that you had unlimited space.
Although, and Joan Didion used to copy Hemingway word for word, right? To learn her stuff too.
I do that.
Probably at this table.
Maybe. I do that myself.
I do too.
I was reading you that passage that I sent to Mattis. That's because when I finish a book, I go through and I type up all the stuff that I like out of it. I either do it by hand or I type it up. And I get this experience. Like, obviously, that's also to gather material, which I use in my books. But the real benefit is that I have typed multiple books worth of other people's writing over the last 15 years. And I feel that going through my fingers.
I do that too, or I did that too. I don't do it anymore, but I used to.
It gave me I'm still thinking about it, but it gave me a weird take on AI, actually. You wouldn't think it would, but so oftentimes if it's a long paragraph and I'm going to print it out, I'm going to put it on the wall, or I'm going to I'll type it up in Gmail. Like, I'll open up my Gmail and I'll write it there, right? And Gmail has a predictive AI layer on top of it. So if you send me an email and you say like, you're like, hey, do you want to meet here at 11? And I'd be like, yes. And then it would show in light gray, like, see you there.
and I can hit a button and it'll just type "see you there" for me.
Oh, really?
It guesses based on millions of other things that other people have written, what it thinks I'm going to say, or what the right thing to say is, right? So let's say I'm sitting down and I'm writing a passage from Hemingway because I want to get the juices going. You'd think it would be able to know how to finish this sentence, right? The first draft of anything is, it should say shit, right? Because it's actually, but it's not, it never knows. It never actually knows.
Oh, that's interesting.
What we all kind of agree is perfect writing or excellent writing. So there is, I think, something fundamentally irreplaceable about great writing.
Yeah.
Maybe bad writing is replaceable or mediocre writing is replaceable, but something unique and new and different is, at least up till this point technologically.
It is irreplaceable. When they figure out how to do that, that's when we can throw in the towel. I don't think Hemingway gets enough credit for how great it isn't. Just that it's short words or it's simple things. Like I guess it's the opening to A Farewell to Arms, where he talks about the dust on the trees that summer and the troops walking along the road, bumping, and then it comes back to the dust in the trees at the end. No AI can't do that,
Yes.
I mean, it's poetry. I don't know what it is, but it's not just simple stuff, It's genius to get to where he got with that. So I have to forgive a lot of his other bullshit,
Yes.
Anti-Semitism, anti-Blackism, anti-gay,
Also, he's just fundamentally a bully. Just like they talk about in the everybody behaves badly thing. He liked to just, we should box. And then, I'm going to just punch you in the face when you're not listening.
Yeah.
He was an asshole.
Yeah.
I think if you met Hemingway, if you were one of Hemingway's peers, you'd probably be like, fuck that guy. There's that term art monster. He was an art monster.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
But the art was great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like an inverse of Fitzgerald, it's like Fitzgerald turned the energy inward unfairly on himself, and Hemingway turned it outwards on other people. But they were both fundamentally abusers. One just chose himself.
This
as the
book,
victim.
That Summer in Paris, also talks about Fitzgerald. They're all there together. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
The guy's first name is Morley. I'm trying to bring it back.
Okay.
I can't remember what his last name is.
You know what is? The names back then were just incredible. Like John Dos Passos. What a sick name. Maddox Ford.
Yeah. Which I don't think was his real name anyway. Yeah.
Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott. Just the names are so great.
They seem great. Yeah. Now
Gertrude Stein is a good name. They're just so good. The names are so good. You mentioned anti-Semitism. I was thinking about how I was going to write about this too. I have a Daily Stoic email where I was messing around with it, but I was going to make this argument that anti-Semitism is the oldest virus, and that it infects the Romans at different times, and that it's this virus that you kind of watch consume societies, cultures, and then every once in a while, like a historical figure, like a brilliant mind, Henry Ford, where does he pick it up? And it warps and it breaks his brain. Elon Musk,
you might be onto something. It is like a virus. Yeah.
In Meditations, Marcus Aurelius talks about, he says there's two types of plagues. There's one that destroys your life, and he's talking about the Antonine plague. And then he says there's this other one that destroys your character. It makes you hate other people, or it makes you commit injustices or inhumanity. And anti-Semitism strikes me as this kind of perpetual, sometimes it's dormant, sometimes it's not, but it kind of worms its way in. And once it's there, it's hard to cure.
It's true. And there's no other people on the planet that somehow, are the target of that same thing. Back to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians,
Yes.
So,
yeah.
That's why Israelis act the way Israelis act, and why Jews act the way they act, me included.
Yeah.
You can't. It's an indelible thing.
And it's so easy to pick up. right? And like I saw this meme, and it actually changed how I think about things. But it was something like, all my life we never had cats because my dad was allergic to cats, so I didn't like cats. This is what this thing is saying. So I didn't like cats. I always had this aversion to cats. I was suspicious of cats. And then he's like, then I got a cat and I love it. And he's like, and then I realized that's what racism is. Like you just pick up this thing. You caught it in transmission from a family member, from an environment, from an area you're in. And it gets in there. And obviously there's more severe cases than others, but it's this thing that kind of, it's a mind virus, you know, it gets in there and it messes with how you see the world and how you see people who, if you could zoom out just enough, or you could look at it from just a, you would realize are utterly indistinguishable from you in every way.
Yeah.
It's strange how that's the one that doesn't go away.
Yeah, and it definitely does not go away, you know?
Yeah. And it finds ways to reconstitute itself and mask itself, or the symptoms look different in different times.
Yeah.
But there is this underlying condition.
Yeah. You can see that it's sort of stopping me, you know?
Yeah.
I'm I don't know.
Why is that?
Maybe it's emotional for me, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe I don't want to go there, you know?
Huh. Yeah. Okay. I guess, I mean, there are other forms of it, right? Obviously, racism is another form of it. And you could see how the original sin of America is the way that this idea has permeated, you know, into the institutions.
Why is it so ineradicable, you know?
Yeah.
Nothing seems to change it, you know? You can have Michael Jordan be, you know, the idol of XYZ, a million people across the American South or wherever it is, but yet nothing changes in terms of, you know, I remember when I was in college, which was a long time ago, I went to a Klan rally just like to laugh at it, you know? Hey, let's go out there having one, you know? And I thought, this is gone. This is, you know? And now it's back with a vengeance. It was kind of funny in a way. They actually had the Grand Wizard, whoever it was at the time, was there. And he was, believe it or not, he was kind of funny. Yeah. I mean, there was like the Klan was out in this field. Yeah. And there were various Duke students and UNC students hanging around. And he said, I remember he said, you know, the Republicans have their conventions and the Democrats have their conventions at the Cow Palace. We have ours in the cow pasture. He says, but at least we know what we're stepping in and how high to roll our pant legs. And everybody thought, that's pretty funny, you know? And actually it was not a hate-filled event like you would have thought. It was sort of embarrassing more than anything else. Yeah. But that was why I thought, this is over. This is like something from 100 years ago. Yeah. And I never thought it would, you know, be back with a vengeance. But
well, that is the thing about the Klan. It's this insidious virus or thing that it was semi-comical when it was started, and it became serious, and then they thought they eradicated it, but there was a little, and then it goes through these
it's like herpes, you know, it just never goes away. Yeah.
I remember my father was a police detective, so he would get assigned to these different divisions, and he worked in the hate crimes division for a bit when I was a kid. And I remember he took me to this sort of community meeting once where they had asked him to speak about maybe there'd been a hate crime in the neighborhood or something. I forget what it was. But he was saying that one of the ways that these groups recruit is like they would go into a high school or a public park or something, and they would graffiti on the walls like "kill whitey," "fuck white people." They would write racial slurs against white people. And that's how they would seed, like a sort of people go, what is this? And so they would create a kind of a defensiveness That's almost like what is it? A false flag? Is that what they call it?
yeah.
Hitler does this, right? Like you.
I mean, you write about it, and trust me, I'm lying, right?
Yeah.
Creating a sort of a sensational thing to get people to react to it.
Yeah. And so that's how they would drive recruitment in the areas, is that they would make white people feel persecuted. And I'd always remember that. And then I just saw, like, in South Africa at some university, someone had written all these things on, and I saw it first as a news story that someone had written all this stuff. And then a few weeks later, they catch the culprit, and it turns out it's this racist apartheid group that's doing it. And you realize also just like how timeless, in a sense, the ways in which, I don't want to say good, but ordinary people are caught up in these movements, or they're exploited by these movements by the same kind of fundamental triggers or human weaknesses. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Which are also indelible. They never go away. The trick always works, you know?
Yes. How do we make
it activates
somebody
the virus
the enemy?
again? Somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, shingles, like you have it in your body, and then you get exposed to something and it re-triggers it. Right. And,
I know what I wanted to ask you about, your opinion about something. One of the things they talk about in Vedanta that we were talking about before is like that what I would call resistance, what somebody would call the monkey mind, the crazy stuff, they just call the mind. That's the source of all sort of negative stuff. And what they would call, then there's a level in their thing above the mind called what they call the intellect. And this is sort of like Marcus Aurelius in a way, where the whole goal of Vedanta is to live in the intellect and not, and rise above this. Is there in Stoicism a parallel to that?
Yeah, your ruling reason, or your rational center. Marcus Aurelius calls it, in one of the translations, it's rendered as the command center.
All right. In fact, you were talking about the gladiator in the arena today.
Yes. And so, you have this, sort of this happened, so I think this, right? But then wise people, or, smart people, have cultivated the ability to sort of check that against this thing. Is that really true? Which
is really what Robert Greene's philosophy is about too, right?
Sure.
Getting to that level, zoom back to the 30,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Like a therapist, you'll tell something to a therapist that you think, and then the therapist will go, is that true? Or why do you think that? Or what makes you think that?
So the skill is to do that for yourself.
Yeah. Huh? Do you think everyone thinks that? These kind of questions that get you to realize, oh, this is just a thing that I made up. This is just my unconscious, sort of system operating under a stimuli or a trigger or whatever. And sometimes that's the right one. Sometimes your mind is, as we said, you have this idea, this calling to do something, and your mind is saying, well, that won't work, or what about this? And then actually you should kind of follow that sort of deeper, instinct. But I think more often than not, it's about sort of, I don't know, someone wronged me, I must seek my vengeance. Is that actually the right way to do it? And that where we get ourselves in trouble, is not just where we as individuals respond that way, but when something happens at such a profoundly shocking way that everyone is in lockstep.
Which is really where a guy like Trump is sort of a master instigator.
Yes.
At creating that sort of virus thing you were talking about, that people are all going to sort of react out of the amygdala, whatever it is. And I suppose journaling, I'm not a journaler, but is a way of getting to that level of intellect where you do it for yourself, What do I really think? What happened today? What's, what
journaling is fundamentally is putting your thoughts up for review. It's interrogating.
Am I full of shit to think this type of thing? Huh?
Meditation is a form of that. I think going for walks is a way to do where you're having to sit with those thoughts a little bit. And the Socratic method is this, right? Like,
Yeah.
Well, what about this? Oh, so you mean this? And as you play that out, you know, you realize it's not on as sound a footing as your emotional or your, you know, your emotional sense would have you believe.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you think about, how important it would be for someone like Marcus Aurelius to be doing that in meditations. Whatever he wants, he can do.
Yeah.
Like there's a moment where Hadrian, his predecessor, gets angry and he just grabs a pen and just stabs it in the eye of a secretary. Like he's so upset, just, what the fuck is wrong with you, right? And nobody, like, no consequences. You can't get impeached. You know, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so Marcus trying to not be like that, but knowing that he could be Tiberius or Nero or Hadrian, he could do whatever he wants. I think the journaling practice of meditations, the notes to himself, is the process by which he filters out the intrusive thoughts or the destructive urges.
Yeah.
And we all need that.
Yeah.
And society needs some mechanism by which it does this.
Yeah.
This is what leadership is, but this is also what elders are for and literature is for. I mean, I think, again, you go back to the Greeks, like, this is what the tragedy is there to make you go, oh.
Yeah.
Or the oracle. You go to the oracle and the oracle gives you this riddle and it forces you to actually think about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
You know what we need here, this is one of my pet peeves, we need in America is the practice of ostracism like they used to have in ancient Athens. You know, for our audience, let me spell this out here.
Yes.
They used to do once a year in ancient Athens, they would have an ostracism. And what it meant was everybody would vote and there would be one person in the society that they would then exile for 10 years because they thought it was for the good of if somebody got too much power, somebody was too much of a pain in the ass, whatever it was. And it was interesting in that not only there was not so much opprobrium attached to this, like they didn't confiscate the guy's property. In a way, it was sort of an honor in a kind of a sense. And a lot of times, some of these guys that would take the 10 years, they would travel around the world and go to various, go to the pharaohs in Egypt and gain knowledge and do all that sort of stuff. But it got somebody out of the city for 10 years. And I can certainly think of at least one person that we would love to ostracize right now.
Well, yeah. I mean, you think the American system is predicated on the idea that if you lose multiple elections, if you are criminally investigated for dozens of felonies, if you have been impeached twice, if you have been revealed in the court proceedings to have been an inveterate liar and fraud and philanderer and sexual abuser, all things that are now factual statements about Trump, who I viscerally disliked from the beginning. But the idea is you would leave in shame. Aaron Burr is probably the only similar American. Aaron Burr and maybe Jefferson Davis are the only two people that kind of reach that level. Jefferson Davis tries to flee, and actually Lincoln's plan before he's assassinated, he goes, if he were to accidentally make it to Cuba, that'd be all right with me. He realizes that he needs to go away. Aaron Burr heads south and goes to explore and sort of wraps up his days that way. But we don't have a strong discharge method. Yeah. It's supposed to be the founders wrongly assumed that character and a sort of a social cohesion, a shared sense of values, would make it impossible for someone so humiliated and so repudiated to continue to show their face. But I would argue we were up against an existential threat the second that he managed to walk on that second debate stage after the Access Hollywood tapes. I know Billy Bush, actually. He read the Daily Stoic in his own exile. And he
he wasn't the one doing it, but he was humiliated. It sent him into a whole spiral of self, examination and questioning, and it collapsed his marriage, and he had to do a bunch of stuff, right? But for Trump, his superpower is that he could get up in front of 70 million people and go, meh.
Yeah.
And you can't.
It's the whole MAGA superpower of shamelessness. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. The founding fathers thought that there would be shame.
Yes.
People would feel shame. But if you don't feel shame and you just stay there and you say, hey, 3 strikes, I'm not out.
Yes.
Throw it again. I'm not leaving,
Yes. And then it calls the bluff of the system.
Yeah, it does.
And the system.
It's terrorism,
The system really doesn't have a way to enforce the bluff. When Jackson tells the Supreme Court, you enforce it. And they go, shit, we don't really have a way to do that.
Yeah.
The whole system relies on voluntary cooperation. And so in that way, he's Shakespearean or belongs maybe even in the Greek or the Roman plays where you have, he's so bigger than all the human vices in every way that the rule is designed to contain ordinary humans, even what they would call men of ambition. It can't
no longer apply.
And there's nothing. There's no.
Yeah. So we need ostracism. I got to tell you one. I'm sure you know this story, but I'll tell you.
Yeah.
There was one character, a personage back in ancient Athens named Aristides. And do you know about this one? And he was called Aristides the Just and was a very super honorable guy. So the way ostracism worked came from the word ostrakon, which was a potsherd. Mm-hmm. They would break a potsherd apart and you would write the name of whoever you wanted to ostracize and they would throw it into a big jar. So supposedly an Athenian guy from the country, a farmer who didn't know how to write, it was that day when and he came up to Aristides on the street and he said, I got to write, would you help me write the name, And he said, sure. So he said, Aristides. So he writes his own name and the guy says, thanks a lot. And Aristides says to him, just for curiosity, why do you want to ostracize this guy? And he says, they always call him Aristides the Just and I'm just tired of hearing that shit. So MAGA existed even then.
Well, and as the just, he is obligated to participate in his own removal, but he respects this. Maybe the subtext of the story is he respects the system enough, even though it calls for his head.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a Stoic named Agrippinus who is sort of a foil of Nero. And he, he's asked if he wants to attend this Nero's party by this other philosopher who's sort of like, should I go? Should I not go? They all hate Nero. And he goes, yeah, you should go. And he goes, why should I go? And he's like, because you thought about going. He's like, for me, it's not even a question. So it's inevitable he would find himself, in Nero's crosshairs. And
what happened?
He's brought up on these trumped up charges.
I knew something like that would happen.
He's working. He knows they're deciding his fate. They're casting the votes or whatever. The Senate rubber stamps whatever Nero wants. So he's working out. As he's waiting for the info to come in, and it comes in, and they say. You've been exiled. And he goes, and my property? And they say, you get to keep your property. And he says, very well, we shall have our lunch on the road. And then he goes, he just accepts, a fate. And then there's another Stoic named Rutilius Rufus, who's sort of the only honest official in sort of pre-Caesar's Rome. And the idea in Rome was that you would get a political job, not because you wanted to be of service at that time, but because it was the way to get rich. Mm-hmm. And you wanted to get sent to one of the provinces, which you would proceed to loot. And you would come back to Rome, a rich man.
Just like today.
You wonder, so-and-so enters Congress with a net worth of $200,000, and 12 years later, they have $32 million, and how does this work? Yeah. So the idea was you would go and loot and come back, and then you would throw the games, you would start to throw this money around, and then you would run for higher office. So Rutilius Rufus is sent somewhere at Smyrna or Asia, somewhere like this, and he's not interested in corruption. He wants to do a good job. Put aside the ethics of colonialism, he does a good job, and he's a good governor. which immediately runs him afoul of all the lower level officials who also got this posting for their looting.
He's like Serpico.
Yeah, exactly. He's getting in the way of the not honest. His honesty is troublesome for other people. So they bring him up on charges of corruption, right? They frame him for the one thing he would not do. And, he's sent to trial, and he refuses to utter a word in his defense. Cicero begs him. He says, "You got to fight," and he says, "Socrates didn't fight. I'll take." He wants it to be an indictment of the system, and so it's the big trial. Everyone's watching. The full farcical nature of all of it is unavoidable. It's a show trial. Everyone knows it, and the sentence comes down. He's to be exiled. But there's one mercy. They know that what they're doing is wrong, so they offer him one mercy, which is they won't kill him. It's exile, and he gets to choose where he's going to be exiled. So you know where he chooses?
No.
The province he was brought up on trumped up charges, where the people accept him with open arms because he was the only honest official of that time.
What a great story.
And it's this sort of, it's the idea that the Stoic is supposed to be the last honest man, that you do the right thing, whether they love you for it or hate you for it. And you should probably steel yourself in advance for the fact that they will hate you for it.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were starting to tell the story, how does he get executed?
Yes.
I know he's going to get executed one way or another.
Yes.
Now, wasn't he somebody's mentor or tutor?
Rutilius Rufus? Rusticus was Marcus Aurelius' philosophy tutor.
I knew it had an RU at the start of the name. Yeah.
Yes. But the argument, like, this is happening the generation or so before Julius Caesar and Cato and the class. So there's this great book by Mike Duncan called The Storm Before the Storm. And he says it's wrong to think of the Republic simply collapsing because Caesar made it so. It's a steady decline of a collapse of like norms.
Us today,
people who could have stood up and did something but didn't. It's the widespread acceptance of political violence. It's the rule of the mob. This is what is setting in motion, the inevitability of a Caesar, not Caesar. Like, Caesar obviously has choices along the way, but if Caesar had not been Caesar, somebody else would have been Caesar. And there were people who tried before Caesar. There's the Catalan conspiracy and all this, but it's a very haunting book that I both recommend reading and tell people don't read if you want to continue in your feel-good naivete. Should we talk about this book a little bit? Okay. Yeah. What did you? I mean, I have come to love the daily format, and so I'm excited to have this on my desk because I like to sort of alternate between different ones. But how was writing for you? Did you write them one a day, or did you write a bunch in a row? How did you think about it?
I wrote it just almost like a work of fiction, where I definitely thought that I wanted the book to be, since it is a one day, in a row thing, that somebody that was going to start a project, like write a novel or write some kind of long form thing, that they could start, and we're going to have to deal with all forms of resistance along the way, all forms of self-sabotage. To start like a day one and kind of address the first chapter in here, the first day, is called Resistance Wakes Up With Me. Yeah. And it's like when people ask me, when do you first experience that sort of thing? And I say, as soon as I open my eyes. So it was something that on your first day, you could start there. And then it's sort of the middle of this book is all about, you were just saying you don't have Act 2 horrors, but everybody else does, and all of the panic that you have in the middle of work. And then it takes it through to the end, where the big question at the end is, what if you never succeed at all? Oh. What if you're doing all, and
do
then
everything
it sort of
right and it doesn't work?
Addresses that kind of issue of like writing or any form of art, any form of creativity as a practice, as a noble practice. And so I just thought that everything I've written in my various, Turning Pro, Do the Work, all those things, I want to try to bring it all together in one book that you could start at day 1 and go all the way to day 365, and it would guide you through and would make sense in as a cohesive piece of thing. Also, I wanted to cite, my stuff is in 2 silos, the stuff I write. Right? Mm-hmm. There's my War of Art stuff about creative process, and then there's my kind of ancient history fiction. And the 2 really are the same.
Sure.
Because one's about the external war and one's about an internal war. So in here, I take a bunch of passages from Gates of Fire and from The Lion's Gate about Israel, and all sort of war-themed stuff, and bring that into this internal battle situation. So that I wanted to do too, to get sort of a whole thing across everything that I've done.
Is that why you did it as like day 260? You did it on days, like the Daily Stoic is April 8th. I did it. I rooted it in dates and in months. Yeah. But yours, you were thinking about it more as a year journey.
Like if somebody picks up the book on April 4th, I don't want them to think, oh shit, I can't start this until, January 1st. So day 1 is whenever you start, That was my theory.
The number of emails I have gotten in the last 7 years when people go, I just got the Daily Stoic, what day should I start? Almost makes me wish that I did it that way just so I wouldn't get that email anymore. But it's like, it says in the intro, literally like 3 paragraphs in. The idea is you start on the date that you're on and you go around, because the idea is you're supposed to keep doing it. Like the goal, like the first thing you're supposed to do when you actually have some more days, but when you get to day 365, you have a bonus week, or when you get to 366, if it happens to be a leap year, the idea should be, and then the next day you start the next one. Because it's supposed to be like, I've now had people who have gone through the Daily Stoic for 7 consecutive years.
They should,
and I had to do a leather version because like they don't hold up that well. Yeah. Like you can't carry a book with you every day for 7 years.
One thing I did want to say before I forget this is the illustrations in here are also by Victor Juhas, who you worked with.
He did, and my kids' books.
I give my partner Sean Coyne great credit for turning me on to Vic. Vic is a great illustrator. Yeah, so you did it, The Boy Who Would Be King, and then the Epictetus book, right? Yeah. Yeah, Vic is great.
But there is something about doing loops. Like I've read Tolstoy's Calendar of Wisdom 4 or 5 times, gone through. And every time I go, how did I miss this?
Yeah, right. How did I miss this the last time? Yeah.
It's because that day, that wasn't what I needed to hear. And maybe that day for 3 consecutive years, it wasn't. And then, as they say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. That same thing, now it resonates because I brought an experience, or I have an openness, or it somehow, even though it wasn't intentional for that moment, it's perfect for that moment.
Yeah. And the other thing I've tried to do in here is like make it work in a sequence. So it isn't like just that day 7, day 8, day 9, day 10 are all actually about the same thing. It's all carrying the same process forward. Yeah. So that it isn't just a random, like your horoscope in the newspaper.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. They're building. Although the chances of someone reading it every day, no one's going to be perfect. So that's also part of the process of coming back is you're probably not going to miss the same days, right? So you come back and you realize you were on vacation, you left it at home, so you missed these 8 days. But now it's exactly what you needed.
Yeah. And then there's the other crazy serendipity thing that a lot of times, like you were just saying, that day somehow your horoscope pops up and it's exactly what you need to hear. I hope that's the case.
Well, that happens with the Daily Stoic email. So every day, I finished the Daily Stoic, and then every day for the subsequent 7 years, I've done this email. And
which I subscribe to. I read every day.
That means a lot.
It's only like 3 things that I subscribe to. That's one
I love that. Yeah. Well, it's my favorite thing to do. I do a parenting version of parenting one too.
I'm amazed that you do it every single day.
Well, I don't do it every day. Like today, I wrote 4. I wrote 2 Daily Dads and 2 Daily Stoics. And those I write them in the doc, and then the editor Kristen for Daily Stoic and Daily Dad grabs them edits them, sets them, adds links to them, and then sets them for me to record them for the podcast version. And then she decides the schedule. Hey, you've been talking about this theme too much, so we're going to space them out. Or, in October, we're doing a lot about Memento Mori because it's Halloween. She kind of picks the rhythm of how she wants it to go. But I'll get emails from friends usually because I try not to get emails from the lots of people who get them. It would drive me. I couldn't handle the daily. I can't have a conversation with everyone who likes it. But anyways, I'll get an email from a friend be like, "This is absolutely perfect for what I'm. How did you know?" And it's like, I wrote that 76 days ago. That has been sitting there. I didn't know that 3 days before, this event would happen, or I certainly didn't know what you were going through. But that is what is so cool about literature, but also art is you're making something that means something to you in this moment. And then it's like this time release capsule, it's kind of this slow, and then it's exactly perfect for some person at a moment down the road. Do you have entries that you think are your favorites or that mean the most to you?
Well, there's one in there called prostitution.
Okay.
And I don't know where it is. It's halfway through. But yeah, I do have a bunch of things like that. The one about prostitution is I just say that you gave me this thought, that what I do is in each daily entry is at the top of the chapter is a thing from a particular work of mine, from The War of Art, from Gates of Fire, whatever. And then the bottom half is my sort of commentary on it. And so in this one, it was, I think the top part is something like, to work in the arts for any reason other than love is prostitution, And then I say underneath that something to the effect of, that I've sold out 1,000,000 times. I've worked for Mr. Charlie. I've done things I wouldn't tell my mother about, but I was a whore to do it, and I can't excuse myself in any way. And that's one of my favorite ones of that. But I hope that something like that, hits somebody and encourages them in the moment.
But there are some things you wouldn't do for money, I imagine, creatively, right?
There are, but there are. There are a lot for me. But certainly, I used to work in advertising. You used to work for Dov Charney or whatever his name was. We've all worked for the man,
Yes.
And we have to forgive ourselves, I suppose.
As long as you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, I think it works. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, as long as you
got to keep body and soul together one way or another. Yeah.
Yes. It is hard.
Yeah.
You need. I think people think. You need the money or whatever to then be creatively free. The problem is you actually get it and then you don't want to give it up. Do you know what I mean? Like, do it.
I never had that problem.
Nobody wants to take the step.
Some people
step down, right? Like you think. I guess what I'm saying is you think being financially successful would raise your risk tolerance. Because you can afford to, but you actually tend to be more risk averse.
That's true. You get spoiled by it. Although I never made enough money that I had to worry about that kind of stuff.
But actually, I think about it this way: it's not just money, though. It's like you'd think having a hit, right? You've had many hits. That it would allow you to then comfortably do whatever you want creatively. But actually, no, now you have this thing that you measure yourself against, right? You go, this sold this many copies. Are you I love this book. I've been raving about it. Deliver Me from Nowhere, about Bruce Springsteen making Nebraska. Have you read it?
Yeah, in fact, I got it because of you. I haven't read it yet.
Just to think about what a punk, courageous move it was to come off Born to Run, his first sort of hit album, his first charting album, his first world tour, and then to go, for my next act, I want to release these acoustic songs I recorded in my bathroom that are dark and disturbing and weird and utterly unviable commercially. That's my next project.
Yeah, good for him. What guts
the guts that takes. Yeah. And it's, that wasn't, maybe he couldn't have done it after Born in the USA, but he could do it,
he was just successful enough that he felt comfortable going in that direction, but maybe not so successful that he had to look over the edge that he was jumping on.
I just want to say one thing for whatever this is worth, that since I actually started writing novels that were coming from my heart, I've never done that.
Really?
I've never written one for money or any, because it never worked that way for me.
Sure.
When something was a success, it was a complete surprise to me. But I've before that, I did what I had to do. But since then, I've never done that.
So you didn't have any sophomore jitters after The Legend of Bagger Vance? Like, your first novel comes out, it sells, it gets turned into a movie. There was no, I got to top that. It was totally artistically, I'm not saying you made the wrong choice. You had nothing, no wrestling about what to do next?
Not whatsoever.
Wow.
Because if you think about, like, the second book was Gates of Fire for me. And as I was writing it, I thought, who's going to possibly be interested in this? This is as uncommercial, a place that nobody can pronounce, spell. Americans hate stories about anybody but Americans. So it's a whole, nobody's going to like this book. So I just thought, I was just seized by the story. I just had to tell it. So I've never have really said, I'm going to sell out this time. By that time, I was so old, that I felt like, what's the point, to do anything other than what I want to do?
It is with The Obstacle Is the Way. In retrospect, people think things that are different, right? So, like, with The Obstacle Is the Way, it ended up being it ended up dwarfing the success of my previous two books, right?
Oh, really? Did it?
And then obviously I've written other ones, and it's become sort of a niche that I'm now identified with. So people think, oh, he must have done that for money. Like that was, you were doing that because I was seeking a bigger market, right? But in reality, it's actually a much scarier thing. Like, okay, Taylor Swift is now the biggest musician in the world. So someone who's into country music might go, oh, she was into country and she sold out by becoming a pop star. By going general. But in fact, to leave the niche in which you are comfortably ensconced and which people want you and are willing to pay for you to do more of, it's actually the scary thing. Only if it works out and it dwarfs what you did in the past, then it seems like you sold out or jumped ship. When I went to my publisher and said, I want to write a book about an obscure school of ancient philosophy, they were not like, thankfully you've decided to get commercially ambitious. And they were at least willing to back me. Adrian did buy that book. Yeah. But you can imagine the market was not like, we are eagerly anticipating this work of philosophy from an uncredentialed college dropout in his early 20s, It was an uphill battle every step of the way. So you really do have to have the interior motivation that says, I want to do this because it's important to me. I always say the only reason to write a book or to do something is because you can't not do it.
I agree completely.
That's the thing that gets you.
In fact, I think if you don't have that thing, you're in the realm of prostitution.
Yes.
Doesn't mean it's going to work,
right?
But it probably won't work.
Yes.
But that's the only motivation that I think that's pure, that's valid, and that is coming from a soul level.
Well, and that goes to what we started with, so it's a good place to wrap up. But that is work with attachment. You are doing it not because you want to, not because you are indifferent to how it does, but you think like it'll mean something to you. It'll fulfill you in some way. You think it's important. You think it'll help people. You're doing it because you think it's justified by an outcome, which is, as you said, not only not guaranteed, most things don't work. Like 90% of things fail. So you might as well do it because you want to do it and because you are motivated to do it and you enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
To do it only for the promise of the potential upside, which is almost certainly not coming, is a bad bet.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've hardly ever done a book that I had a contract for. It's almost always been a spec thing for me. So I have to sort of ask myself, if I don't make any money at all on this, am I still okay with myself doing it? And, I have to look at the bank account and say, can I afford it? But that's, I think, I don't know, that's the way I work.
It's funny when I wrote The Obstacles Away. I'd sold Ego is the Enemy, which I was in the middle of writing, and my agent Steve Hanselman came to me and said, "You should do a book of a daily devotional of Stoicism," and he's like, "I'll do the translations." And I was like, "What? You'll do the translations?" I didn't even know that he spoke Greek or Latin. And he goes, "It'll be your best-selling book." And I said, "Sure, Steve. That sounds like something an agent would say." So when he said that, it seemed so preposterously untrue that it did not. It was not part of my calculus in any way because I could not conceive of how that could be true. And certainly the publisher didn't buy it either because the advance was like not very much. Certainly not very much compared to what it ultimately ended up selling. Like it, and so I wrote it because I was captivated by the idea, by the challenge. Like it seemed like an interesting puzzle. Like how do you break a philosophy down into 365 pieces? And I was also interested in solving this problem, which happened to me a lot, which is people go, where should I start with the Stoics? And it wasn't like, oh, you should start with my book. The idea was, it was problematic to say Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus or Seneca because maybe that wasn't the right, like I wanted a sample, a survey sample of it. So I was motivated by that equation and I really got into it. And I got so into it that I'm still doing it to this day. Like I'm still doing it. And then the irony is that Steve ended up being right. Like 2 million copies later, he was right. But again, I don't know how there was any evidence that would have been true.
How did he know that?
I have no
but
idea.
You didn't believe it, and that's the important thing.
Ironically, I didn't believe it, and that's why I did it. I don't know if that I would have done it. I don't. If that's why I was doing it, I don't think. I think a different book would have emerged.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, Yeah.
Well, we got anything else we got to do?
I don't think so.
Should we call it?
Okay, let's call it.
Let's call it.